Hi, my name is Pastor Sheena Cameron.
And I'm Reverend Gerald Cameron.
And this is Word Up, a community where preachers grow. We want to take this time out to thank you all for watching our videos, for liking our videos, for sharing our videos, and we thank each and every subscriber that we have.
Thank you.
Today we are going to journey into the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, verses 9 through 14.
And we want to dig a little bit deeper in this text. This is a familiar text to many preachers and to many people in the pews. But we just want to go a little bit further into unpacking some of the wisdom that God has for us.
And so, really, we thought that the best way to do that is to look through the characters, right? So we know who Jesus is. So we're going to save Jesus. But we want to look at the two characters, the Pharisee and the tax collector. And actually, I'm going to start with the tax collector. Tax collectors in Roman government were contracted individuals who had a contract with the state. So similarly to any other state contract, they had a job to collect the taxes from all the families. And the Roman government had about an idea of what they should be collecting in. The contractor received a portion of those funds for themselves for the payment. They remitted the rest to the Roman government. Well, the corruption comes into play is because, of course, they wanted to make more. They wanted to exploit the people. They saw an open opportunity, and they decided, I will charge the family higher so that way my piece, I can pocket more and still remit what the Roman government is anticipating. So when we talk about tax collectors and their function in society, their job as it starts out is not inherently corrupt, but it was a system that was able to prey on the weak and to prey on people who, for better or for worse, had to do what they had to do to come up with whatever dollar amount, figuratively, whatever amount that the tax collector warranted. Now let's look at the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees were a movement within Judaism who wanted to remain faithful to the Mosaic law. So the Mosaic law given in Exodus is the law that marks the inception of Israel's relationship with God on the other side of the Exodus, literally on the other side of the Red Sea. So with the law came the covenant, the contracting, the binding agreement. And so what the Pharisees wanted to maintain faithful to was this covenant that Yahweh would be Israel's God and Israel will be Yahweh's people. And so when we look at the words like legalistic and hypocritical, I think it's important that we resist going there first.
Right.
Because sometimes going there makes our sermons about, well, thank God we're not the Pharisees. And I don't really think that the parable about the Pharisee and the tax collector is about that. And so what I'm suggesting is when we look at Pharisees, especially in Luke, they function as a literary device of one who we are in opposition with, one who is an opponent, and one who has a different viewpoint. However, I think that the reason why Jesus and the Pharisees find themselves in exchanges is because there are similarities, meaning that it's not inherently wrong to want to keep the law. In fact, if you go back to the book of the covenant in Exodus, somewhere about in the middle. So you're looking at somewhere about chapters about 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 through maybe about 24 to get the story of the Exodus and then to get the covenant. When you look at that, it's nothing inherently wrong in wanting to preserve that story. In fact, that's what Israel's told to do. And so because we come from a Judeo movement, Christianity is birthed out of that movement. I just would like for us to resist moments where we can bash Pharisees globally, or where we can bash Israel globally, or where we bash movements of people who want to keep the law. Because keeping the law would have been something that Jesus did. It's just that what he was trying to do was usher in what does it look like to keep the law amid changing times. And so he's never coming to abolish or abandon the law. So therefore, I think as preachers and as listeners to the gospel, it's important that we walk that gentle dance, because if we're bashing someone who wants to keep the law, it almost sounds as if we're against keeping the law.
Right. And I think the focus should move from being so caught up on the Pharisee and the tax collector to really understanding both of their understandings of grace. I think that's a major theme in this.
Absolutely.
Is where I think the parable is moving us towards, is really defining and owning the definition of grace. You see that both the tax collector and the Pharisee both come to the temple to pray and to worship. But the two have a distinct way of approaching grace. And so the Pharisee approaches prayer by offering up a prayer of thanksgiving. So thanking God that he's not like these folk.
Absolutely.
Or thanking God that he's not like this tax collector. And then you see the tax collector's prayer, which is totally different, which has nothing to do about anything that he's done. It's really a prayer of confession, where the tax collector's prayer is saying to God, have mercy on me, and to really own up to his identity and for what he has done. And so when we look at this text, not at putting the Pharisee against the tax collector or vilifying one over the other, when we look at the different approaches to grace, we kind of see really where the parable is getting us to, or wanting us to really understand that grace is something that we cannot buy, or we cannot work hard to obtain. It's something that is literally God orchestrated and implemented by God himself.
And I think that's imperative, because when you talk about their prayer, as you just mentioned, they're both praying about something they have done. Mm-hmm. It's, oh, good grief, what have I done? And then it's, look at me. Look
Right.
at everything that I've done. But it's still us doing.
Right.
And grace is not us doing.
Right. It's not us doing, it's us accepting and walking into that grace that already has been prepared for us.
Because God is the one doing the acting in grace.
Right. And so this text really draws us to something deeper, rather than saying, well, thank God I'm not like this, or thank God I'm not so-and-so.
Right.
But really saying, it is only by God's grace.
Amen.
That I'm not this. It's only by God's grace that my life is in a different place. And the tax collector, though he lived a life in which was against God and the practices in which he chose in his profession, he still found it in himself to say, I'm not even worthy. And so what does it mean to walk our congregations to really unpacking what does it mean to see grace? What does it mean to accept grace? And what does it mean to get over ourselves from thinking that we deserve it? And to move towards saying, I'm not even worthy of any grace, but I thank God that God thinks of me so. And in the preaching moment, you may want to turn your congregation to Ephesians 2, chapter 8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, not of your own doing. It is a gift of God. And so really seeing that this thing called grace has nothing to do with what we can do best. It is what God does best, and that is love his own. And so walking our people through that and teaching that, and showing them not to put them to put their lives against one another, but to put their lives against who God is, and growing in that perfect image.
Well, thank you so much for those closing comments, and we thank you so much for taking the time out to watch our content. This is Word Up, a community where preachers grow. Have a good worship experience.
Yes.